much to our sponsors. We've got some just so much generosity is coming out, often out of the woodworks, but some of these listed here have really been some ongoing committed supporters to the nonprofit show. Julia Patrick, I hope you had a wonderful birthday weekend.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is your brainchild, and this is myself, Jarrett Ransom, your nonprofit nerd, but most importantly, so thrilled to have our guest on today, Veda Manager, founder CEO of Manager Global Holdings, and just learned that you really work out of 3 main headquarters, and we're just so thrilled to have you on our show to spend some of your time, your treasure, and your talents with us today. So thanks for joining us, Veda.
Oh, it's great to be here, and belated happy birthday, Julia. I didn't know that factoid. That's wonderful. I've known Julia for a long time and certainly admired her work in the vineyards here as well, but always good to have a moment to celebrate.
I don't know about that, Veda. I'm getting old. So, hey, Veda, I have known you for a while. You're one of my heroes. I'm always inspired. I always tease you that when I grow up, I'm going to be like you because you're just like so whip smart and so cool about pulling all together these different people and things. And so when I thought about board diversity, which is a topic in the nonprofit sector we speak a lot about, but I don't see us navigating forward. And I know that you're on some very high-powered national boards, and you have been, you continue to serve. And so I thought, man, if we could get you in to talk to us about this, it would really help our sector because we just tend to keep getting the same people on the boards. And I'm sure you see this in the boards that you serve. And maybe you could start off by telling us some of those boards with which you serve on.
Yeah, certainly. Again, glad to be with you today. I've been very blessed over my career, and probably having started very early and having that very first experience at age 20 to have my very first board, which was the Arizona Board of Regents. Here, Governor Babbitt, for some of you longer residents of the state, or perhaps know the name from his time as Interior Secretary, appointed me as the student member of the Board of Regents. And at that time, interestingly, sat around the table with the CEO and chairman of APS, Bill Riley at that time, Jack Feaster, a name that many people may know, who was the general manager and president and CEO of Salt River Project. So that, and Don Pitt, one of the owners of the Phoenix Sun. So at age 20, and also being a young African-American, to be sitting around the table frequently with those type of individuals and learning board protocol, learning how to manage, how to achieve consensus, represent students was really my very first board experience, which then allowed me to then migrate to now publicly traded SEC regulated boards. I was appointed in 2008 at the age of 41, 42, while I was an executive at Nike, the board of Ashland Chemical, which is a specialty chemical company out of the Cincinnati area, which also owns the motor oil brand Valvoline, which many of your listeners and viewers probably know. So I serve on those boards. I migrated off Ashland onto Valvoline. On the nonprofit side, I serve on the board of the Center for Race and the Study of Democracy with Julia. So very active. I'm on the ASU Board of Trustees as well. I also serve on the board of the Helios Education Foundation, which operates both in Florida as well as Arizona, solely for the purpose of educational and college attainment. And I also chair a board at West Point, the U.S. Military Academy. So I've had a great diversity of boards that I serve on, and also served on some private equity, smaller, non-publicly traded boards. But I've had a range of boards and been able to provide that input.
So, dumb question, but let's start at the very beginning. Why is diversity important on a board?
Well, it used to be kind of thought of, and not even correctly thought of, as a nice to have. But really right now it is, if you're in business, either in the business of selling CPG, consumer product goods, or in the business of serving human potential, such as you do in the nonprofit world, it's an imperative because the country's changed. And I think what we're seeing right now with the social justice protest of the streets is that those are probably some of the most diverse social justice activism that you've ever seen throughout the history of mankind with regard to, or humankind, with regard to protest and advocacy for change. So if you're in the business side, such as I am, you definitely want views around the table that can represent what this changing demographic looks like so that you can serve that consumer and to be sure that you're maximizing every potential dollar and getting that return on investment that your shareholders are expecting. If you're on the nonprofit side and the human services side, you certainly want those kind of diverse views as well, because the clientele in which you serve at the Boys and Girls Club or at the YMCA or other nonprofit sector companies are likely going to be people of color. So it's no longer, again, to be thought of as a nice to have. It is a must if you're going to understand what are the consumers or the people that you're serving. And frankly, it's just not been good enough. We've, as you were describing in your introduction, Julia, there's a lot of recycling that's happened, which is the term in the boardroom of the same people that look alike. One of the terms of talking about male, pale, and stale is what boardrooms are looking like. And so it's time that people are advocating for a change, and you're beginning to see that.
Mm-hmm. Pardon me as I get my notebook out, because there's so much that I want to take, and I know the show's being recorded, but I already am just, learning so much. And you're right, Veda, I've seen it as the nonprofit nerd. Often the boards that hire me are male, pale, and stale, and I refer to them as, oh gosh, I can't think of their names, but Julia, help me. It's the Muppet men that sit in the balcony. And I say these are the guys that are running the boards. These are the ones that, to be honest, it's kind of like the good old boys. And I moved to Arizona from South Carolina, and it's very much still same demographic. But I love to hear you say, because I pride myself as an innovative disruptor, that, it used to be a nice to have, and I've often felt that we're checking the checkbox, like, do we have an attorney? Check. Do we have a person of color? Check. Do we have someone from our community? Check. But are we really doing it for the greater good? Or are we simply checking checkboxes?
Right. No, exactly. And I think it's good to have some sort of metric and formula for the competencies in which you need in order to run an organization. You need someone that's competent in finance. You need someone who's competent in regulatory, those things. But the part that's often missing is the fact that you don't have diversity of viewpoint. And if you end up in groupthink on a board and everyone's agreeing and every vote is unanimous, without any consensus building and discussion, you'll end up with a lesser product. Again, whether it's a service that you're delivering to the public or it's a service you're selling to your consumers. And it's a lesser product if it doesn't have the rich fabric and the tapestry of many different voices. There's about 4,800 roughly board seats in the Fortune 500 right now. And so the slowest growing group of that right now are women have seen, and particularly Caucasian women have seen the greatest growth, mainly because many organizations are using that to fill their diversity requirements. And also there's been some regulatory push in California. Many of you know that all male boards in California legislature mandated, and New Jersey and other states are looking at this as well. The UK and European entities have also adopted many of these measures that you have to have gender diversity on boards, whereas and it's become a regulatory and mandatory debate. But the other thing that you're seeing now is also the institutional investors at the corporate level are demanding that, hey, I'm BlackRock, I'm Fidelity, I'm T. Rowe Price. I'm not going to buy a big block of your stock and give you the capital that you need unless you have more diverse viewpoints at the board. So they're seeing it as an environmental social good and an investment imperative. So if we can get more of that kind of accuracy, I think you'll begin to see more change. Caucasian men have been losing about 1% to 2% of board seats a year, but they still dominate 58, 60% of those board seats.
Right. And, to your point, we're starting to see that with funders, Veda, big funders that are coming in and saying, hey, look, we want to see a board composition report. And at the end of this, we're going to send everybody who's on this show a board composition resource, which we'll get into. But this is coming down the pike if it's not already. So for those of you seeking funds from more and more foundations, and certainly, the private sector in terms of sponsorships, they want to see that. And it's not good enough to say, oh yeah, we have a diverse board. They're going to want to start to see reports.
Right.
And say, what languages are being spoken, your age, the demographics, are people coming from the same little neighborhood in your community, or are they coming from your region? So I think you bring up a very good point,
I want to,
absolutely. Oh, go ahead, Jared. Sorry.
well, I just didn't say, I wanted to thank our viewers for reminding me the names of the Muppet Men in the balcony. It's Statler and Waldorf. And Veda, I would love to know, at the age of 20, how, again, tell me how you got on this board, right? Like, and not just you, but how do we get other young people to serve on board? Like, how do we engage in the civic engagement early? And I don't even know how to best pose that question, but if you would walk us through, at the age of 20, rubbing elbows with, some of these really just astute individuals running communities, tell us how that worked for you and how it felt for you sitting at that table.
Well, no, appreciate the question. So I think I'll do this in two parts. One is how it happened, but also what I think we collectively need to do in order to get a better outcome and result. So I know when I grew up in an African-American household in the St. Louis area before I came to St. Louis, before I came to Phoenix, I'm sorry, that board service wasn't necessarily a topic that we talked about at the dinner table in our households. And particularly corporate boards was not really something I was aware of to that extent. So to come here in roughly 1979, and I was a junior at Arizona State University, and there's every year already had been mandated by the legislature that at least one student representing the body of students at Northern Arizona University, University of Arizona, and ASU needed to have one student rotating on that board. I knew there was an application process, and I applied for that and went through, and I was one of the 3 names that was submitted to then Governor Babbitt at the time to be selected. Now, I have to say, it was both a combination of some persistence on my part. I happened to grab him by the coattail when he was coming to ASU for a board meeting, reminded him who I was and I had applied. And so you can't be shy about these kind of things if you really want something. But I also knew other things. Many of you also know that Governor Babbitt wanted to run for president in the 88 presidential, which was the seat that was open after Ronald Reagan could no longer run again. So knowing that aspect of things in 1986, 1987, that this was 82 in which I was supported the board seat, but knowing that he needed, in order to go to the South, as you just talked about, Jared, and you know the African-American representation in the South, to get votes, Super Tuesday was new at the time, that he needed to demonstrate that he had a record of appointing judges and appointees to boards, and he wanted to run for president. So that also, I think, played in my favor, in addition to he had marched in the civil rights and been a Bloody Sunday with Martin Luther King, et cetera. So he had a commitment. So it's also understanding as a young person where those points of entry can be and where you can put those pressure points in order to achieve the outcomes in which you need. Now, the sad codicil here is that I don't think there's been an African-American on the Arizona Board of Regents since I served in 1982 as a student. And that's not a good thing, given the, again, diverse composition of our student base here at Arizona universities. We certainly should have had an African-American on the Board of Regents since that time.
Okay, so then let's talk about that, because if how do we know that, right? How do we begin to have that conversation? And 2, how do we navigate this so that we're not just finding tokens and we're not just, as Jarrett said, checking that box?
No, absolutely. I think, again, it really is incumbent upon the elected leadership, particularly in the case of publicly traded boards, to really redouble their efforts to identify individuals, professionals, in which there are plenty of here, both in Arizona and otherwise. Just as Jared came here looking for opportunity and a change in pace. And in Arizona, I found the reason why I was able to come here in 1979 and by 1982 be appointed to one of the most important, influential boards in the state is because Arizona is the kind of place in which if you demonstrate community interests, shoe leather, get out and work in your community and do some things, you can access the networks of people and institutions faster here than you probably can in Atlanta or Los Angeles and other places, because there tend to be older families, older money, more established, almost caste systems in Boston and New York and places where you're going to be behind the son of the congresswoman or the congressman or the son of the local CEO before you can even get a shot at those. So places in the West, Phoenix, Albuquerque, Western cities present a greater opportunity on that front. But to your question, it really does take the combination of the grassroots organically of people being willing to serve, willing to position themselves, even if you serve initially on your homeowners association board or your local community board as a prep ground for the bigger board so that you're ready when it comes along and you have those competencies and no one can deny you that opportunity. But the elected officials and also the CEOs have to really step up and say, this is you have to be intentional about wanting to have a diverse board.
So I am looking at an email I'm trying to find an email that you sent me this morning, Veda, very early. And it's really a tool, and I can't find it right now, but with some tools that you emailed me about how we can start looking for diverse board members. And I would love it if you would chat about that, because I think what happens is, like a tribal society, we just see the same people and the same people at our church, temple, synagogue, coffee shop, our alumni association or whatever. And we don't go outside into that different track. And I'm wondering if you could kind of help us with some maybe very overt things that we could start looking for and reaching out to. And again, you have to remember, this show goes across the country. So it's resources that, maybe we're going to have to do our homework, obviously, but.
Yes, no, absolutely. So I think I think that email was in two parts, Julia. One was the Black Enterprise magazine, specifically for the African American community, publishes every year in the effort to increase board diversity. But there's also other groups for women, catalysts as well for diverse women and gender, making sure that more gender representation is on boards. The Hispanic Association for Corporate Responsibility does it for Latinas and Latinos. The Asian American community has one as well. And all these groups and coalitions, if you will, are working together to increase board diversity. But speaking for Black Enterprise, they publish every year a list of companies that are currently without African American representation. So I spend every September with a group called the Black Corporate Directors Group. It's about 150 of the top African Americans who serve on corporate Fortune 500 or Fortune 500 boards roughly. And we get together and we get to know each other and we cross-pollinate about who is existing on boards, but also to be sure that we don't just recycle the same names or that each of us don't sit and take up all the air in the room with 3 or 4 boards. We also bring in some young aspirants who are either middle management or right on the cusp of being ready for board service to backfill us, because many of these directors are in their 60s and 70s and whatever else. And now you need those people in their 40s and 50s who understand social media and technology, et cetera. So we bring in some aspirants to be able to groom them for the next generation of board seats. So it's efforts like that. And I've seen over the last 5 years, many more, shall we say, board training efforts, if you will, within the respective groups, knowing how important board service is, whether you're talking about, again, the Girl Scouts board on the nonprofit side, or whether you're talking about a Fortune 500 board, or even a private equity board that isn't publicly traded, but certainly wields a lot of weight in the financial markets. Board efforts really identifying individuals out there that they're getting them ready, teaching them the kind of things that I learned at 20, as I mentioned on the Board of Regents, consensus building, financing, bonding, all the things that you need to do and be ready to then, when that call comes from a recruiter or from a governance or nominating chair, you're ready to then to serve. A very deliberate tactic that I'll share with your audience as well, and something that I employed at Valvoline, where I on the board, I made a deliberate decision to join what's called the governance and nominating committee of our board. And because I'm a person of color, it ensures that anytime we have an opening for a new board seat, that I make sure that I'm working with a diverse recruiter or that there's a diverse slate that's before the board. Now, I don't solely make the decision about who joins the board, but if I weren't occupying that seat, I would have probably I may have some doubts about whether the committee that does make the decision and the board about who joins and backfills a board seat, would they be looking at a diverse slate of women and Asians, Latinas, and others to join these boards? And that's a very deliberate strategy that we've been teaching a lot of our colleagues, is that try to assume the reins of power of the governance and nominating committee, because you then help control the narrative about who then becomes the board, your next board seat, your lead director, or even your board chair. And that's a very deliberate tactic that I think many can follow.
That is super genius. And you know what, Veda? I've never heard anyone say that, but that is crazy smart.
Yeah.
Well, and it makes me, what can we do? What more can we do? And often I hear from, because Veda, I do consulting with a lot of different nonprofits nationwide. And, and in fact, they'll say, we need to do board development. Well, that statement, it holds so much in that statement, it's like, that's a loaded question. But, it makes me think, I know for me to be completely transparent, my best sales pipeline for me as a consultant is a board member, because if you serve on a board, you typically serve on multiple boards, or you have connection to multiple boards. Either you have served in the past, or you're being looked at to serve again in the future, right? And so for me, it makes me question, and this is, it's probably an open-ended question that we may not know the answer to, but I'm putting it out there for everyone who's watching live and watching recorded, is what more can we do to prepare individuals across races, across cultural diversity, to one, know that these board positions are available, right? They're available. And how do we prepare everyone to serve on a board if that's something of interest? And, again, it makes me, I'm now on a plight, because it's like, I know I can play an active role in that, right? How do I prepare individuals who have a desire to serve the community to serve on a board? And, and whether it's alliances of nonprofits or, association of fundraising professionals, there's so many associations within the nonprofit sector that we can do more. And, and there's so much more to be done.
No, absolutely. I think it's such a critical component, and I think you hit the nail on the head. No matter where you are geographically in the country, every community of any size and scope usually has, I guess in Phoenix, it's Valley Leadership, but there's a Tampa Forward or some equivalent organization in major communities. And I think board service, and again, being deliberate and intentional about finding individuals and adding that component of service to those trainings and to those interactions, can go a long way toward diversifying our boards out there, and making sure that you find and identify those individuals and that they're ready and qualified to serve. So that certainly would be a step as well. One of the things also our Black corporate directors group does is that we kind of organize around really three principles to kind of help both companies, nonprofits and companies kind of get ready for board service, but also to kind of advance some progress in that. So the first thing we emphasize is people. What are you doing to ensure that the pipeline within your own respective companies is diverse? Are you reaching out to HBCUs, providing internships, and by HBCUs meaning historically Black colleges and universities out there, to provide those internships that can then turn into line and entry-level staff jobs? So what are you doing to help that pipeline, or even within your own company, being sure that the individuals there within that company are promoted and they're getting experience in the jobs that can make them ready for senior leadership that then lead to CEO roles and board roles? So that's one, people. Two, it's about purchasing. If an individual doesn't want to go into a company, and such as yourself as consultant, what are you doing to hire diverse law firms? Or what are you doing to advise hire financial firms that advise you on your bond and debt offerings, or other services that you have? Not just about custodial or janitorial services. Those are the low-hanging fruit. I'm talking about the higher value add services that really then lead to transactions, because within what happens, these firms are able to grow, they partner with other firms, they hire other diverse people that get experience, and then they're able to, again, be ready for board service or to add greater value to the quality of life of the community. And the third one is about philanthropy. And again, so we're talking about nonprofit here. Philanthropy is something we all are involved in. I took what was used to be called the American Humanics, I think it's now called the Nonprofit Alliance. But I was a student in that program at Arizona State when I was coming up and while doing board service. So I had a pretty good perspective about what it took, and even worked at a Boys and Girls Club, which gave me even greater perspective about this particular nonprofit sector growing up, and still contribute to it today because of the valuable experience that I had. So organizing around those three principles, people, purchasing, and philanthropy, how much are corporations, and we've seen a lot of philanthropy in the last few days from companies, particularly around Black Lives Matter and things that advance racial progress. And we need to see those focused and those sustained so that they add to the overall body of work to get us to a better and more, a better equal society.
Wow. So Veda, this is awesome. And you're going to freak out, but literally we have like 3 minutes left.
So I looked at the clock and I was like, no, I don't want, I want it to stop so that we can just continue.
Yeah, because this has helped me a lot. We have a lot of questions that we did not get to. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to filter some of those off to our Friday Q&A. We might come back to you, Veda, off camera and get your response so that we can articulate these on our Friday show. I want to really quickly talk about the board composition assessment. This is an assessment that we run through the Nonprofit Academy, and it's tagged to some of our courses. We will send these PDFs out to everybody that's on the show today, so you'll get that in your mailbox, and you're more than welcome to use that in any way you see fit. It goes through a lot of different ways to look at diversity, so you're not just ticking the boxes. And I think what Veda said is so important. You know, what do you have? What do you need? And who are you working on? Because Veda, your comment was brilliant about you've got to start looking at how you fill that pipeline. And that's something I'm not hearing anybody talk about. We're more just like, you know, who's the next person at the table? It's not that. It's got to go deeper. So
got to be a certain intentionality about it, no question.
Yeah. Well, I'm like so honored, Veda, that you would come on and share time with Jarrett and myself. You're probably going to hate me for putting up your information because you're going to get lots of people reaching out to you, I bet, to be on their board. So you'll be like, thanks, Julia. But what an honor. I really, truly believe you're one of the great minds. I'm certainly in my life, but I think in our country. And it is an honor to have you with us. You're a very humble man. You've done things throughout your life that are astounding and history breaking. And if we had more time, I would have you talk about Nelson Mandela and the role and the work that you did in that election, which is astounding. So you are a true hero for all of us. And I've learned so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to be with you. It's
been wonderful. So Jarrett, take us out, sister.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Veda. I hope that you will join us again. I'm going to do a lot of research on you and the boards and just, you know, continue to educate myself. So join us tomorrow again for another show of the Nonprofit Show. And again, enjoy the rest of your Monday. Stay well so you can do well. See you tomorrow.
Thanks, everyone.